My name's Anthony. I'm currently working at IWF. I've been there for a bit over a year, but I've been working on wealth tech in various forms for the better part of 15 to 20 years now. My passion is really about that end consumer and their financial well-being and how technology can start to make financial well-being more accessible for everyone.
Awesome. When we look at that, what's the number one thing your customers want and what matters to them most?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've got some pretty decent insight. Post the MLC acquisition, we've got around 2.5 million Australian super fund members. So we do speak to a broad variety of people on this topic. In terms of what they want, we don't necessarily start with technology. We start with what they're doing on their day-to-day lives. And really what people genuinely want is to feel secure and confident that their finances are going to be well managed today and tomorrow, and they want to know they can do it themselves, and they want to know that if they don't feel comfortable doing it themselves, they've got someone to speak to. And so when it comes to digital, the role to play is really how do you solve for those problems, whether that be budgeting and cash flow management, all the way through to really sophisticated investment solutions that are automated or managed on your behalf by an advisor you trust.
And do you find, Anthony, just to follow on that, it doesn't start with technology, I agree, because it's not a customer says, I want tech. We all know that we need tech to solve it. But so has really, IWF has been taking care of customers for 100 years. How do you think about it when a customer, do you go out and do customer surveys? Do you listen to what they say? How do you kind of try to solve that problem on a day-to-day basis?
And first, it's over 170 years. I think someone back in the head office would not be happy if I didn't correct you there. How do we think about it? We really start with evidence. So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of market research out there that talks about our population, the Australian population, in terms of their wants and needs, how sophisticated and comfortable they feel around their money, and the very specific issues that are on their mind on a day-to-day basis. So we start there, but then we also put that in the context of our members, and we do quite a number of surveys. And that's fine from a quantitative perspective, but we also like to get out there and listen to the voice of customers. So we do a lot of qualitative work as well, where we will video record people and ask them specific questions and take them through a conversation. You pick up some of the gems when people use their own language and you can see the expressions on their face. It's far more human way to understand the problems that we're trying to solve.
But what are the actual strategies that firms should implement if they want to close up this digital gap?
Well, I don't think there's any one particular strategy. You can kind of take two of a variety of options and they'll both be equally correct. It's about what's going to be right for you and the people that you want to have a conversation with. So I think Azrael was talking about this really simple approach to keep things nice and neat, make it very easy and accessible for the user. There's also this tension between simplicity and this kind of momentum behind the super apps, whether it be the SoFars and the M1s in the US. So do you want to be the one thing to everyone? WeChat's obviously had a lot of success in Asia with that as well. Do you want to solve every problem, or do you want to solve one problem really well? And that's not necessarily something that you wed yourself to day one and forever, but you need to figure out what your identity is and stay true to that. But that has to be linked back to your purpose and the problems that you're trying to solve for your end customer. So I think strategy's got to start with who you're solving a problem for and what is the problem that you're actually solving. That's what you anchor everything back to.
I love that idea, because you're right. Like sitting in Asia, there is this super app momentum, whether it's a Grab, it's a Gojek, obviously in China, a WeChat, etc. It solves everything. But maybe if we look at the US and there's a range of different, they're not super apps, SoFi or Robinhood, but they're solving individual, clear statements and problems from that perspective.
Yeah. If you look at what Wealthfront and Betterment are going down that same path, they're originally fairly what we call traditional robos, but they're also extending on top of that a lot of cash flow and debt management capabilities as well. And so I think what's happened is that the incumbents, when you describe that gap between fintechs and the institutions, these fintechs are starting to get maturity and credibility. And so I think that's really allowed or given institutions the right to kind of cast their gaze over some innovation, some forward thinking, rather than just protecting what they've already got.
Anthony, I mean, you've, again, looking at lots of different solutions and, there's so much out there. What would you say to people watching? Like, what have you found really works? What's useful? Maybe even what's not useful?
I think the biggest thing is there's not one thing that's going to solve the problem. We looked at lots of other industries and where there's been disruption and really strong dominance by new players. So you can look at the Netflixes and the Amazons, and really it's about personalization. So when you're thinking about what solution works, there isn't any one solution. And especially when it comes to content, you need to appreciate that everyone's at their own point in a journey of becoming familiar with wealth and wealth creation and investing. And so when we talk about everyone needs a balanced equities portfolio, well, as an industry, we've got hundreds of years to have come to that conclusion. But for someone who's just turned 21 and they've just gotten their first paycheck, well, how are they supposed to know that? And just telling them that, there's no connection between their own money and the way they're earning it and the way they're investing it. So you need to really start them off on wherever they are in terms of the level of sophistication and be able to grow with them. So I'd say personalization, but then the ability to actually support them and evolve with them and adapt throughout their evolution of sophistication.
And is that coming back to, like, we haven't really talked about data so much, but people seem a little reluctant, like I'm always happy to share what I watch on Netflix, but when you say to somebody, share about your money, people can be a little more reticent, but data is the key to personalization, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose it's about what data we think we're relying on. And how much data do you truly need to start to understand how someone feels about their money? There's a great study, I think it was done out of the University of Georgia, where they surveyed over 2,000 Australian consumers and got them to self-report how they felt about their own finances, and then compared that to their actual financial behaviours. And they realised that there was probably around 8 questions that if you had answers to, and they were multiple choice, you had a really good sense of what that person was like and how they felt about their money, from which you could then back solve a really nice solution, at least find a starting point to have a conversation that felt relevant to them. So I think that's really important, being relevant as opposed to having high velocity of content.
Yeah, like we've been doing a bit of work here called predictive planning, and we put out a survey to ask people about their money, and it was super interesting. But in part of our research, we found out that 44% of people in America live a cash flow negative life. Now, money in theory, like my co-founder Aki, based it on the game of Go, you have one piece and you can make a move. Money's the same in theory. You can either save it or spend it. I know it's more complex, but in reality, that's kind of it. Yet why is it so complex? Like, it is unbelievably complex. Like, we all find money hard and we understand why, and there's lots of reasons around that. But yeah, I think it's a good point. If you can't get the data, there's probably a number of questions that you could at least ask somebody to level set where they are in that wealth experience.
I mean, it's a perfect example. Asking someone about how much they save per month. I'm going backwards, not saving. That's all you need to know. Someone isn't saving anything each month. If they're spending more each month, that tells you everything you need to know about where that conversation needs to start, because until you fix that, talking about wealth and investing, it's very hard to have that conversation while someone's still dealing with the living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, there's this idea that spender to saver to investor. You can't take somebody from spender to investor, because if they're spending all their money, they have to learn to save. And so we actually have to create new savers and new investors to be able to do that, because you're right, you have to take them on that journey. How would you, as we wrap up in a minute or two, how would you summarize, look, we've really been talking around this digital area. You've talked a lot about transparency, looking under the hood. It's surprising, again, what we found out is, while everybody needs to go digital, every financial institution, most people are still very early stages and they're looking for advice. They're looking for people to tell them who are on that journey, what should we do? So how would you, if you were talking to other financial institutions out there who are trying to kind of just up their digital game and understand their customers, how would you, what's kind of the best one minute takeaway you would give them? Anthony, what's your 1 minute takeaway for everyone?
And go and have conversations with real people. We sit in this industry and there's this great feedback loop or echo chamber, but go and have a conversation with 20 different people from different industries of different age groups and just ask them how they feel about their money and what's important to them. You'll get so much out of that compared to a survey. Yeah, I definitely encourage that. Yeah,
I remember sitting in these fintech forums, people going, like 2 years ago when we had real conferences, and everyone was like, oh, robo's overdone. Everyone's got one. And I said, go out on the street, not in a fintech conference, and pump into somebody and say, hey, how's your robo-advisor working? They'd have no idea what you're talking about. So yeah, you're right. It's a good point. We probably listen to ourselves too much, right?
100%. Get out of that echo chamber for a bit.
Makes sense.